Hey there, like I promised from last week's episode, I got Chuck Inglefield back. We'll go, he's the wealth advisor from Charlotte, North Carolina, who specializes working with retirees to create a rising investment income that they will not outlive. He's also the author of the Holy Cow You're Retiring book, which provides valuable insights how to navigate challenging investment markets. Um, we are continuing this conversation about depression from last week. And Chuck, thanks again for joining us.
Absolutely.
Um, at the end there, you said something to the effect that the fix is not all behavioral. That was a big thing for you. And I wanted you to elaborate on that because that's one of the things I've observed myself. It's not all behavioral. And I'm really interested to see what your side is.
Sure. I mean, as an entrepreneur, you're hardwired to achieve goals, and
Mhm.
often on your own. Like, I can do this. I don't need help. I can do this by myself. And so, with depression, that was the approach I took in the beginnings. All right, well, I've got to suck it up and just change how I'm dealing with this and try to do it behaviorally. I've just got to push myself out of this depression. And that's not possible. And it took me a while to realize that's not possible. And really, it was again the therapist who helped me realize that wasn't possible, and it evolved from there.
And then you referred to this high functioning depressive statement.
Exactly, exactly. I mean, a high functioning depressive is not a great world to live in, and at some point, I was about to bow out of it. I couldn't do it. I don't know what I was going to do after that, but I was about to throw in the towel, say, I just can't do it. Just can't do it.
Mhm. Um, so behavioral, so you're saying, just to get a little context on here, and I believe I understand what you're saying, because I think
Mhm.
what I would have, or I think I have done for some other things is for me is I would have researched it, try to figure out how to come out. We're all problem solvers, like you say. We're entrepreneurs are hardwired to achieve goals, which is extreme problem solving and push through and go through. And I think that's a very great point that you made is this is something you can't just say, suck it up and push through
Right.
because it's almost, if you're depressed or anxious, it's almost says that'll just make it worse, wouldn't it? If you try to
It
push through.
does. It does. It does make it worse, and it makes you harder on yourself because you're not pushing through it. You can't push through it. I'll give you an example. So before I had really been proactive about dealing with my depression, here's what my world was like. So you would wake up every day, and you would have a depression fog, if you will. It was just this heavy weight, this heavy fog that um, you knew you couldn't break through it. It was just going to sit on you all day long. And but every once in a while, you would wake up and there was no fog. Like you knew it. You opened your eyes, you're laying there in the bed, and you're like, wow, I actually feel okay today. And I would use those days to be productive because I knew when the fog was there, I was not going to be productive. There were points where I wouldn't go to the office for a week.
Mhm.
And this is before we used Zoom and everybody met virtually. I just wouldn't go. I couldn't do it. I didn't want to be around anybody because the fog was there. But on those days where the fog wasn't there, I would I would definitely take advantage of that. But here's the challenge it makes when you're dealing with depression. I wouldn't make plans. Meg would want to say, "Hey, my friends are having a party this Saturday. Can we go?" And I'd say, "Can we choose later? I don't want to commit right now because I don't know if on Saturday the fog's going to be there or not. And if the fog's going to be
Oh, so
there,
you're anticipating having a fog or not. You can't schedule
exactly,
it.
yeah, and you don't know, and so you don't commit. You don't make plans. You're disengaging from life, and so you become known as an introvert, and you aren't necessarily an introvert, but you're just managing through your depression.
So an introvert or someone who doesn't care
Right.
could be another
Yes.
one.
Yes. So that was, that's how you were living life, or how I was living life, is I just didn't know how long it would stay around. It might stay around for 3 or 4 days. It might stay around for 6 weeks before that fog would lift. And, uh,
6 weeks, you
and
said?
oh yeah, for sure. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. And that's over years, right? It's not just, oh, this, it happened for a little while. I mean, this is over years. And
Okay. So it's a repetitive cycle?
yes.
Okay.
So, in the last episode, we talked about these waves of depression and how so the waves could last different amounts of time, but they could last for a very long time. And you just you worked through it as best you could. Um, but in those periods where it really was on top of you, you just disengaged.
What would you recommend? What other, sorry, I'll ask that question later, but what other aspects of your day-to-day life was affected business-wise, family or friends? You talked a little bit about your business, a little bit about your friends and family, but are there other aspects that affected the day-to-day?
Sure. So let's talk about business wise. As a investment advisor, you can't not talk to your clients, right? You
Mhm.
have to you have to talk to your clients. They want to talk to you. You have to be proactive to talk to them so they stay your clients. And there I had to use behavioral psychology to get through it, where I would call or where I would call my clients. So I set up little games for myself um, to get that work done. I didn't want to call anybody. So what I would say is, all right, when I'm in the office, I can't have a cup of coffee until I've called 3 clients, and I need my coffee, right? So
So a little bit of
yeah,
reward system.
you would just do rewards, little tiny small rewards for yourself, and that's how I got through it. I didn't enjoy it, didn't make it easier, but it forced me. That's how I managed to get things done.
So you said you did it, but you didn't enjoy it. So it sounds like there's some perseverance required in this
Yes, absolutely.
process.
Absolutely. And I guess I'm fortunate in that as an entrepreneur, I'm just hardwired to achieve, and that helped me push through that. But I've seen, even in my own family, where people aren't able to do that.
You think that has a lot to do with your support system around you also? Like, I'm not
Uh,
taking away from the
Sure.
individual ability to push through, but what you discussed the last episode is that you had not a pretty good, you had a really good, great support system, your entrepreneurial friends, the medical doctors that you had around you that specialized in depression, and then even your
Mm.
wife and your immediate family. If you didn't have those three, do you think that could affect the outcome, make it longer, make it worse? I don't know. It's hypothesized. We're not doctors. Like, we're going to make sure we're not doctors.
Right.
We're not. This is just all experience discussions. So,
Mm. Yeah. So back then, I did have something that specifically helped, which is I had a behavioral coach. And so this coach I would check in with once a week, and she became sort of an accountability coach. And she was the one that really taught me to set up these little reward systems for
oh, okay.
myself. And that helped tremendously. And on the weeks where I didn't get things done, we talked through it. We talked through why and make some adjustments. Well, maybe the challenges need to be smaller. So instead of 3 calls before you get your coffee,
One.
it's one, right? Just get started, right? And that's one of the hardest things is just getting started.
So for the listener, I don't know if you picked up on this, but I really picked up on this. What Chuck just said was we set goals. It was okay not to achieve them, but they didn't stop there and go, let's try again. They went and looked back why. They problem solved what happened. Goals too high, certain situations prevented it, and troubleshoot it to make it work again. Right. I think this is key for a lot of it. With my experience, I've always looked back to see what happened so I can avoid it again in the future. And for the listener, I think we need to do that a lot more often than we should. So I credit you guys for looking back to see what, it couldn't be. A lot of people just say, I didn't get it. Well, move on. but going back to see how, in this case, you're saying you actually kind of sucker punched yourself or set yourself up to fail,
Right.
but said, hey, maybe the goal's too big right now. We'll just bring it down so we can succeed the next time and then build up our confidence and our strengths and our abilities. That's what I heard. And that's
It is.
awesome.
Yeah. And even within that behavioral world, some things work for some people and others. So one of the things I found is that I'm not really motivated by money. So, coffee was a better reward to me than money, even though I knew if I was doing my work, I was going to grow the business and it was going to generate more money, but I didn't care for that. I mean, I just didn't care about that. One thing that I didn't like was losing money. And it turned out, so we had another strategy for that, which is if I didn't make all my calls that week, I would shred $100 bill. And $100 bill for me at that point, and still is.
Whoa. Nice.
Yeah,
Go
it
big or
was.
go home, man.
That's right. So that only happened one time. And you have to have somebody shred that $100 for you. You can't do it yourself. So my
Wow.
assistant at the time, we've been together 25 years now. We still laugh about that story. She took that $100 bill and shredded it right in front of me. She made me watch, and that helped. I mean, that helps. Like, I don't want to do that again. But essentially, that's what you're doing by not working, not growing your business, right? Not running your business, is you're giving away opportunities. And so that was one way to really visualize that.
I really love how you're reframing a symptom or a situation and make it very visible, like the waves, the disengagement, and then like what you just described there, shredding $100 bill is something you don't like.
Right.
Um, honestly, sometimes we need to shock our system to that for like the $100 bill thing, but you found it unique to you. And I think that's a very great point that you made. Your depression is not the same like other people's depression. Everyone's different. Everyone experiences different things. And the treatments are going to be different. And what you explained just now is actually everyone has different motivations, right?
Absolutely.
Like to me,
Absolutely.
shred the $100, whatever. I don't care because that's not my motivator, just like yours was. And I think that's a very important fact for the listeners to understand. We're just sharing experiences, what works for us. If it works for you, fantastic. If it doesn't, at least you got a different perspective and you just got to figure out what works for you. Um,
And let me say one thing,
yeah.
Andre, here is for a lot of entrepreneurs that are listen to your podcast, shredding $100 isn't going to change their world at all. So they need something a little bit more painful in that experience. And so the next step, and I never took this step, is my coach recommended, okay, I went to the University of Michigan. Our biggest rival is Ohio State.
Mhm.
And if you grow up in Michigan, as I did, you can say nothing good about Ohio State. And there's this hatred. It's maybe an unhealthy hatred.
Rivalry.
That's right. So the next stage was, she said, well, if the next stage is that you write out a check to the Ohio State Alumni Association and send them money. Now that's painful. That,
I
so
love it.
not the
Wherever you get
dollar
the,
amount that counts, right? It's the
it says
principle.
who's getting it. It could be $1, but it's
That's
still to
right.
Ohio State.
That's right.
um, what you mentioned therapy a few times. Can you just expand a bit on the therapy that you did take? It was it one-on-one psychotherapy, group therapy? What you just explain a little bit of what you're
Yeah, that's a great question. And with depression, I think it's always got to be one-on-one because it's very personal, and there's a lot that comes out of it. So my therapy was one-on-one, and we talked through my family history of depression. Immediate families, obviously, it's obvious to me who has it, and some people have admitted and started to be proactive about it, and some people have not. And so we kind of shared that experience. And then also I worked at identifying there were some days where I thought I was depressed, but it was just that I didn't have enough sleep. And
Whoa.
that was an important distinction to learn, because once you're depressed, you start to set an expectation for that day, which is, I don't have it. I can't do it. The depression's just too difficult to get through, versus, hey, I didn't have enough sleep, but if I just get started, I can still make something out of this day. And they can feel very similar, sometimes. And
So
understanding.
they feel similar, tired, fatigue, no energy.
Yes.
But now
Yes.
you're talking about your behavior is actually slightly different. I'm just tired. I just need more sleep to do something versus depression is just, I'm just tired. I
Right.
ain't doing shit.
Yeah. Yeah. And you check in with yourself. You say, okay, well, is the hopelessness there? Is the meaninglessness there? And no, it's not.
Self-awareness
Yeah,
questions.
exactly.
Nice. Nice. Um, so you didn't do any group therapy or CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, because I do know that is a therapy type for depression.
Sure.
For the listener, if you are being recommended to take CBT in your ADHD, it's actually a different type of CBT treatment. If it's for depression, then they're not really checking the right facts in the right way. So there's a subtle difference, but CBT is fantastic. It's about catching your thoughts, checking them, and letting them go in a way.
Right.
So that I know that is also one-on-one, I think is very important. I don't think myself being group only would have got me to where I am now without the one-on-one. Because was your therapist challenging you at the same time, or just listening to you and saying, "Oh, poor you"?
It started, with her doing a lot of listening, and then some reframing of, what I would call distorted thinking. Right. So
I love that word. Yeah.
yeah, so you have this experience, and you distort, the meaning of it, and and that can be unhealthy. So the therapist can help you identify, and in my case, identified some things, um, where you harbor, and you kind of keep these distorted thoughts that affects your behavior, and it can affect your mood. And so she helped me think through some of those things and identify those things. And some things are really small, like, oh gosh, I wish, my friend wouldn't do this, or I don't like when that happens, and just sets everything off, and blah blah blah. And that's just distorted thinking is what it was. It was
That's you
something.
convincing yourself there's actually a problem when there may not
Right.
be. May not
Right.
be.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
So like this,
And
what you just said there, I think distorted thinking affects your perception, which also affects your behavior at the same time.
exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, distorted thinking, I forget what the fancy CBT term, but it's basically cognitive in distortion. Yeah, there it goes. Cognitive
Mhm.
distortion.
Right.
Basically checking the facts. Is that true?
Mhm.
Do they really hate you? Do they really?
Mhm.
Because a lot of it's perception.
It is, and you can have it for years. Like you can have. I'll share a funny story. So I went to Oklahoma State undergraduate, and I always wanted to go to graduate school. And growing up in Michigan, I wanted to go to Michigan and University of Michigan. And so when I was at Oklahoma State, I was a pretty average student. I wasn't a great student. I wasn't a bad student. I was fairly average. So when I got into Michigan, I called my mom, and I said, "Mom, I got into Michigan. They accepted me. I'm going to join the program." And the first response of hers was, "Wow, do you think you can get through it?" And I thought, oh man, did that upset me?
I think a
And
lot of listeners can relate to that statement.
right, and I've told her this story, so she's okay with it. So after I graduated, I remember we're sitting out on the back porch, and I said, "Hey, Mom, how about that? Your son, who was going to be held back in first grade, graduated from Michigan with an MBA." And she said, "What are you talking about, being held back in first grade?" I said, "Don't you remember? I got held back in first grade, or they wanted to hold me back in first grade. I remember us sitting on my bed talking about it, and you were asking me, they want to hold you back. Do you want to be held back?" And here now I've got an MBA from one of the top schools in the country. And she looked over at me. She said, They wanted to hold you back because of your age, because your birthday, not because. So for my entire life up to that point, I guess I was 26, I had this chip on my shoulder that I wasn't smart enough. And it just kind of shows you that that was distorted thinking, and right, that I carried with me for years. In my case, it drove me, right? But
It's amazing, and this is what I've really learned in my research the last 4 or 5 years. It's amazing what your brain will do to protect you, but at the
mm,
same time, to prevent you from doing new things by scaring you to stay where you are. And a lot of times it's there to support what you're already thinking. Like my
agree.
my my parents, they hit a moose in northern Ontario with their car. And my dad does not remember 15 minutes before 15 minutes after hitting the moose, or even 15 minutes before the actually sorry 15 minutes before hitting the moose and 3 days after. And I remember the doctor saying this, goes, you're never going to remember because the brain is protecting you from that. The brain is
Mm,
purposely suppressing those memories so you don't have to deal with it, so it's protecting you. And for us to check our facts or perception, especially with ADHD and the rejection sensitivity dysphoria, it's all perceptions. And that's the one thing I really learned in CBT and DBT was, a lot of the lies I tell myself are not true,
right,
right?
right.
One last question, Chuck.
Sure.
In the ADHD world, with our emotions being 10 times, thousands times more intense than most people, we're triggered. We're triggered by something or something from our past. Is depression or sorry, it should be, is your depression, are there triggers for your depression that you know of?
That really good question. And um, I would say now, no. I can't identify any specific triggers um, that I would say cause depression, because it is more chemical than behavioral, I
Right.
think. And so the one thing I do know is that, and I'm always on the lookout for this, the medication that you take, the impact or the effect of it can to wear off or be less effective. And so I'm always tuned into, are the medications still working, right? Are they doing what they're supposed to do? And fortunately, in my case, knock on wood here, for I guess 4 years now, it's been steady. There's been, the effect's been the same, but there was no real trigger. Just like before the medication, I couldn't identify any trigger. You just woke up and the fog was there, or it wasn't.
Okay. All right. That's interesting. I was just curious. And then I think the way you described it makes sense. There are no real triggers that you can put your finger on it, especially when you're just waking up and like you said, like this depression fog.
Yeah.
Um,
So, because I guess it's, the difference is you don't choose the mood chooses you, right? So there's no trigger that affects your mood necessarily. You have no control over it, and mood's probably not a robust enough term. Um, but you really don't have control over it. You can't behave your way out of it.
I think that's a great thing to say. You don't choose the mood chooses you, and you can't get through it with behavior only.
Absolutely, right.
Um, and like, thanks again, Chuck, for sharing your story. Just a couple key words here that like you in the last episode that just to me hit hard. Depression fog. You have the non-fog is that you are productive. Well, the depression fog is you're not productive. You don't want to do anything, which related to your not enough sleep. You know you're tired, but you can still do something. But if you wake up depressed, you don't want to do something, but you still feel tired. That's a very, very subtle difference there that requires a lot of self-awareness. And you've gotten that from what I'm understanding from your therapy and the medication. And what you made pretty clear is the medication isn't the only reason you are where you are now. It's the therapy, but also being proactive in your own treatment is very important. You need that as well. Everyone else can't do this for you. You need to take care of yourself.
Right.
Um, and as entrepreneurs, we are hardwired to achieve goals. We can't just suck it up and push through and learn through this. I think it's a very good point for it, because it's right. We just default to that. Oh, we can get to that. We'll just push through, head down, ass up, and just do what we normally do. But when it comes to mental health, and I think this is a very fantastic point that you bring up, we can't do this alone. We need a team. Entrepreneurs, we're used to wanting to do this alone. ADHD brains, we want to do this alone, but we can't. We just gotta suck it up and say we need help, and it's okay. It's okay.
Absolutely. Ask
Right.
for help.
And then
Ask
by
for help.
Chuck sharing his story, I've been sharing my story. We know other people are saying, well, they're talking about it, I can talk about it. And the more we all talk about it, makes it okay for other people to start talking about it. But people need to speak up. And that's why I respect you, Chuck, for bringing that up on that one. And the key one here, and it sounds like with depression, the therapy had to do with listening, but also reframing the distorted thinking you were having. Cognitive distortions, all perceived stuff. So what I also got out of it was this distorted thinking affects your perception of situations and relationships, which affects your behavior with regarding those behaviors or those relationships and people in your day-to-day. Thanks again, Chuck. What I want the listener to take away here today is that mental health is a serious thing, nothing to be ashamed of. I'm really starting to believe that me physically being in shape, taking care of my heart, my lungs and all that, that is important. But I think the mental health has to be a priority today, because I'm learning that if your brain's not working properly, your rest of your body's not working properly because all the inputs are not working well. So seek help, or at least talk to someone who you trust will listen and not judge or fix. Just to listen is all you need. And we need more people that are just willing to do that. And like Chuck said, never be ashamed. We all suffer at times, and we're not immune. No one's immune. If everyone says I'm immune, they're full of crap. And then one question for you, for the listener, before we take off, is why do you think it is weak to seek help for depression? I want you to ask yourself that, or what you think other people's perceptions are on that. Chuck, love you. Love this. I think this is a very awesome discussion on depression. We have talked to Mark Fujiwara in season 1 about his depression. And one takeaway I got from him was depressed people are really good at playing happy.
That's so true.
Right? Just like anxious people are really good at acting not anxious. So thanks again, Chuck. I appreciate it. Do you have one piece of advice for the listeners before we go?
I would say, and let me thank you, Andre, first for all what you're doing here, because I think it's just so valuable.
Thank you.
And you've already said it, ask for help. And it's hard to ask for help, but ask for help, because it does take somebody outside of yourself to be a partner in the bigger decisions that you need to make, is finding therapy, finding a doctor. Asking for help is that first step.
Perfect. I think we'll end on that. Thanks again, Chuck, for your time, and thank you to the listeners. I want to hear from you about what you learned these last 2 episodes. Please email me at andre@andreb.ca. I'd love to hear from you what you think about this and what other topics we can talk. Chuck, thank you very much.
Thank you, Andre.
And we'll talk to you guys soon. Take care.